So one of my subscribers sent me a link to a video called Cultural Complicity. It was given by Matt Lees at Gamescom Congress in 2017. And upon watching this video, I realized that there were a few things in it that I would like to respond to. So if you don't mind, Matt, I would like to respond directly to you, and hopefully in this way we can start up some kind of a cordial conversation about some of the topics that you've raised in this video.
Hello. Oh God, it's loud. Thank you so much for coming. I really wasn't sure if anyone would come, so this is already really pleasant. Today I'm going to be talking about cultural complicity. It's everyone's problem, which is fun, obviously. But the first thing I want to talk about is basically a lot of the time whenever you start talking about cultural politics, people kind of sigh and roll their eyes.
Really? Cultural politics? No, I'm just kidding, Matt. Actually, I think this is an interesting conversation, but I did feel I should probably jump in right here and say I'm not going to go through your entire video. I'm only going to hit the points that I think are of most interest to me. So I'll leave a link to your video down below, so if anybody wants to watch it in complete context, they can do that.
First of all, though, who am I? I'm Matt, and basically I try and have serious conversations about things and make people think by pretending to be stupid and making silly jokes, and that's basically what I do. I do it on two websites mainly. A website about board games called Shut Up and Sit Down, and a website about video games called Cool Ghosts. And most of the time it's about just exploring the nature of play and what play is about and how it makes us feel. But again, we just wrap it up with jokes so nobody notices that.
All right, well, thank you for the intro. Seems only fair that I reciprocate in kind. My name is Troy, and I've been developing video games professionally now for about 22 years. You can see a list of the games I've worked on the screen. Most of my titles have been for children's games, so I really don't have a dog in the fight as it relates to sexism or violence in video games. That being said, I am very interested in the game industry, and so I run my own YouTube channel where I speak about things like Gamergate and feminist frequency from my perspective as a developer.
I think basically games are just about distraction, really. To be brutal about it at the moment. Games are about filling our lives. And I think this is one of the few times where the distinction of casual and hardcore is not bad. Mostly it's just rubbish and should just be put in a box. But here, it's not about what kind of games you play, it's about the type of gap you're looking to fill in your life. Most people, I think, it's just Grout, or Einpressmortal in Germany. I hope I said that vaguely okay, because Grout didn't translate as easy as cement. But it's just about like the size of a gap you're looking to fill in your life.
So I'm all in favor of analyzing games from a variety of different perspectives. In fact, recently I made a video where I tried to argue provocatively that games are the ultimate art form because they're participatory, whereas other forms of art tend to be passive. That being said, I'm not sure that I buy into what you're selling here. It appears to me that what you're saying is that there are different types of games, or maybe different types of gamers, different types of players, depending upon how much they invest in what you call the distraction of gaming, and whether or not it constitutes just something that fills the spaces in their lives, or whether it's something that is foundational, like cement. I think that's where you're going with this. But to me, I'm immediately getting that notion of like you're making some sort of distinction that may not be related to the games themselves, so much as it might be related to the identity of the gamers. Let's see where this goes.
Grout comes in many flavors, though. Don't eat grout. And one of the things I think is really interesting now is the fact that I don't really think there's a meaningful difference between mobile phone games and social media. I think they're both just things that engage us temporarily and allow us to feel like something's happening while we're on our way to work or waiting for lunch, or maybe you were waiting before this talk started and you just thought, I'll do something on my phone. We've got into this weird habit. And I think when you look at games that like fill a bigger gap for people, this is where sometimes we see traditionally a lot more problems. There's increased demands on the medium in terms of like what people want from them. And for a long time, the ultimate idea of a video game, and that's part of what you're selling. You're not just selling a product, you're selling an idea. Is an idea of a game you can play infinitely, the ultimate game that you can just play forever and it will always be fun. And when games seem to promise this and then fail to achieve that, that's when the biggest backlash comes. You know, No Man's Sky was a game which like lots of people, for lots of reasons, got very heavy expectations about it. And people were so angry when it didn't meet this ultimate impossible goal.
So at this point, it looks like you're continuing to develop that idea that we have games that fill small spaces in our lives, like grout, versus games that fill larger spaces or more foundational, I guess, like cement. And I tend to agree that, you know, games have different purposes depending upon the expectations of the player, which is also why I feel like it feels almost like this defense of No Man's Sky doesn't really hold up. The reason that people were so troubled by No Man's Sky release is because the consumer expectations were set very high due to marketing and hype. The product overpromised and underdelivered. That's why people were upset. I actually spoke about this a little bit in a different video, which I called Why Do Broken Games Get Released?, talking about it from a developer's perspective.
And I think the games are a product. They are basically medication for the soul. And it's self-medication though, which is interesting. But this isn't inherently negative. And I think that's the really key thing. It's easy to be like, oh, you know, people are distracting themselves and their problem with games. What's wrong with that? But, and this is the crucial thing, but if you are immersed in something over a really long time and it's an all-consuming monoculture and it's only giving you certain messages and it's only giving you certain ideas, that has very real and rarely positive consequences. So it's okay for a while, but the longer you're doing it, the more likely you're going to start having some issues.
Ah, so I'm beginning to smell what you're cooking here, Matt. It appears that what you're talking about is extended exposure to media and the influence that it may have upon us. This actually has a name. It's called cultivation theory, and it's the idea that if you're exposed for long periods of time to, say, movies or television or video games, that it may start to influence your outlook on the world, or it may start to change your behavior. I think it's important to point out that when this has been studied, the impact has been found to be nominal to non-existent. Our best studies show that there is no impact from extended period of video games in terms of people's behavior or how they view the world. And it's also important to point out that most of our critics in the past have used this cultivation theory, whether it be for video games, whether it be for music, whether it be for movies, whether it be for comic books, saying that they're harming us when people spend a lot of time with it. But the data just doesn't add up, does not support it. People are able to distinguish between fantasy and reality. That's what our data shows us. So if you're going to make this argument, you're going to need to provide some evidence that counteracts the studies that already show that there is no harm from playing a lot of video games.
So, on to, this is what I mean, the roller coaster. Talked about games a bit. Now I'm going to talk very briefly about what happened in 2014. I was invited here today because I wrote a big thing about Gamergate and the connections between that and the alt-right and the kind of fascist movements in the US and beyond.
Uh-oh. So immediately I'm a little bit concerned here. This tie between Gamergate and the alt-right seems to me to be a bit specious. I'm willing to give you the benefit of the doubt, but you're going to need to make the case. I should say that if you are basing your conclusions here on the false narrative that was pushed that Gamergate was just intended as a harassment campaign against women, you're going to arrive at an incorrect conclusion. But let's see where you go with this.
Effectively, I'm not going to go into any detail on this because the people who are victims of this deserve to be able to live their lives and have successes without being defined as victims all the time. The people who were the aggressors and the abusers, they just want attention, so screw it. The wide thing that's important about this is it started off with a man harassing a woman on the internet. There were claims of impropriety. They were just unbelievably debunked very quickly. We're talking like 2-3 days, like, nah, this is false, boom, boom, boom. But then it carried on.
Dang it, Matt. I was afraid you were going to go here. Well, suffice it to say that your version of the Gamergate story isn't supported by the facts. Gamergate was most certainly not an organized campaign with the intent of harassing women like Anita Sarkeesian and Zoe Quinn. Gamergate was, however, a consumer-led revolt against the infusion of identity politics into the gaming sphere, primarily by journalists and some pop culture critics. The timeline for the rise of the Gamergate movement provides irrefutable evidence that this had much more to do with the articles attacking gamers for their identity than it had anything to do with the influx of women coming into the gaming sphere. Had the press not written those articles that attacked the same consumers that they were supposed to be serving, there wouldn't have been the interest in Gamergate that there was, and I suspect there would have been no significant Gamergate movement at all. Note, that the journalists could have addressed some of the issues that they may have been seeing simply by saying that gaming is expanding and becoming more inclusive of all sorts of demographics. There would have been no issue had they done this. But instead, they turned it into a game of identity politics and attacked their core demographic. And that's what Gamergate was actually about.
However, a really important caveat that I have to make, because every time I talk about this stuff, people go, "Brrr."
Wait, how do they go?
Brrr.
Brrr. Oh. Brrr.
Brrr.
Got it now. Thanks.
It didn't, like, Gamergate didn't cause the alt-right. It didn't cause fascism in America. Having said that, there really were some very strong connections, as I wrote in the article, and you can give it a read if you want. But, you know, Gamergate was largely fueled by a website called Breitbart, which was run by Steve Bannon, who then was a big part in the kind of growing the alt-right and gaining a lot of people under this banner, including Gamergate and other people, which then, of course, ended up basically being literally in the White House, and he only got kicked out this week. And even then, I think the damage is kind of already done.
Well, Matt, citation needed. You can't assume that just because some of those involved in the Gamergate movement read some articles on Breitbart means that they were automatically sympathetic or easy pickings for the alt-right. Because Gamergaters had been attacked by the same press that was supposed to be serving them, they had lost a lot of confidence in it, and they went looking for other sources to cover the story. Breitbart was just one of those alternative sources. Another was Reason.com. Kathy Young wrote a series of investigative articles about Gamergate and came away rather sympathetic with the cause. But Kathy Young is also a well-known critic of the alt-right. So saying that Gamergate was in some way a proto-fascist movement via guilt by association to Breitbart just doesn't withstand scrutiny.
So yeah, we had this aggressive, irrational movement that was fueled by anti-progressive ideals and open bigotry. Like, it must be video games, right? It must be caused by video games, because what else could it possibly be? Oh no, it's fascism. So, I mean, one of the things I spent a long time thinking about Gamergate because it didn't make sense to me. It was so irrational. I'd never witnessed anything like it. I spent a long time trying to unravel it.
If I may be so bold here, Matt, I think that the reason that you found it so difficult to unravel and why it seemed so irrational to you is because you misunderstood what was going on. Indeed, it would have been a very irrational movement if it simply were a bunch of angry white men attacking women for being in the industry. But that's not what it was. Rather, it was simply gamers pushing back against the journalists who wanted to define gamers as a negative identity that needed to die or go away. Gamers hadn't harmed anyone. Gamers didn't care if other people played games, but they did care when their own journalists started attacking them as somehow being anathema to the same hobby that they so enjoyed.
Something crucial I need to say about disenfranchisement, because it's a word I've been using a lot. It's a factor, it's not an excuse. And I think the key thing when you look at things like Gamergate is this is a movement of cynics and losers. Like, that's it. There's nothing more to say about it, really. You've got opportunists swooping in to get some extra influence or some extra money. Or you've just got people who failed to find a place in society. And that's sad, but at the end of the day, these people chose hate and bigotry because they couldn't find a place in society. Once you've made that choice, you don't get any sympathy, you just become a bullet point in a presentation about disenfranchisement. Like, that's it.
So at this point, it's become pretty clear to me, Matt, that because of your erroneous premises about what Gamergate was actually about, that you're also arriving at erroneous conclusions. Furthermore, I think it's worth pointing out that by attacking Gamergaters as cynics and losers who are disenfranchised from society, that you're actually perpetuating the problem that we saw with the gaming press. There is nothing inherently wrong with enjoying games or calling yourself a gamer. Playing games does not make you a bad person. Consequently, there is no value in saying that if you identify as a gamer, then there is something wrong with you. Doing so is very divisive and completely unnecessary. It creates this illusion of an in-group and an out-group, or at others people, when really we're all just enjoying games together. there's no reason to engage in these sort of identity politics. Well, all right, Matt, those were the main points that I wanted to hit. I find it interesting that as you continue on through your discussion here, there wasn't that much that I had really strong objections to. In fact, I tend to agree that games can be inclusive and that everybody is welcome in gaming. I think that where I disagree is that I don't believe that we need to radically change games for those who are already happy with the games we have, for those who are identified as gamers. Instead, my recommendation is simply that we expand the tent, allow more and more people in, serve those markets, allow everybody to play games. There's no reason to target a specific demographic within gaming and say that there's something wrong with those people, or that there's something wrong with the games that they like to play. My position here is that video games, with their opportunity for creativity and for character customization, are already the most egalitarian and inclusive form of entertainment ever created. So to that end, let's just all get out and enjoy games rather than trying to label some sub-identity as a group of proto-fascists. And game on!